Hello, and welcome to our podcast, episode number 72. Zombie-killing Queen Alice strikes again in a post-apocalyptic Tokyo. I am Timothy, and as always, here with me, my good friend Thomas. Today, we're going to discuss a film called Resident Evil Afterlife. As always, spoilers ahead, Resident Evil. Afterlife is a 2010 action horror film about Alice leading an assault on Umbrella HQ in Tokyo, slaying the branch except for Albert Wesker, who escapes and detonates a bomb, leaving a sinkhole. 6 months later, she tracks broadcasts from Arcadia, but finds it abandoned and encounters feral Claire Redfield. With survivors' help, they board a cargo tanker traveling along the coast to reach their safe haven. Well, Tom, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, Tim, I have to admit that Resident Evil Afterlife was quite an enjoyable surprise for me. As someone who generally leans more towards action movies rather than horror, this film managed to strike a nice balance between the two genres. The pacing was fast-paced and kept me engaged throughout the entire movie, and I found myself rooting for Alice as she battled her way through hordes of undead creatures. However, I must confess that there were some moments where I felt like the film relied too heavily on jump scares or cheap thrills to keep the audience engaged. But overall, I thought it was an entertaining ride.
Now you're talking my language, Tom. I am not usually a big fan of horror movies either. But this one seemed to have just enough action and suspense to keep me interested without being too terrifying. The special effects were quite impressive as well.
The zombie creatures looked truly frightening.
However, I did find myself getting a bit lost in the story at times. It felt like there were too many characters introduced all at once, and it was hard to keep track of their motivations or relationships with one another. Additionally, some plot points seemed rather convenient or contrived. For example, why would Umbrella leave such an important asset as their Tokyo headquarters unguarded?
You make some valid points there, Tim. The story could have benefited from a bit more focus and clarity. However, I did appreciate how the film managed to keep throwing curveballs at me throughout its runtime. Just when I thought I had things figured out, something else would happen that completely changed the game. It kept me on my toes and made for an interesting viewing experience. As far as the characters go, I found myself drawn to Alice and Claire's dynamic. Their relationship has grown since we first met them in earlier installments of the franchise, and it was fascinating to see how they interacted with each other now that they're both seasoned survivors in this post-apocalyptic world. The other characters also had their moments to shine. Luther West's leadership, skills, and Wendell's comic relief added depth to the group dynamic. Now, Timothy, as you mentioned earlier, there was some interesting trivia about Resident Evil Afterlife that I think our viewers would find interesting. For instance, did you know that actress Ali Larter actually broke her foot while filming a fight scene? Despite this setback, she continued to shoot her scenes using a special effects-enhanced boot. Another fun fact is that the production team used an actual prison in Eastern Europe as a filming location for the movie's final act.
That's quite the information there, Tom. I didn't know any of that. It makes one wonder how much of it was real and how much of it had to be faked or digitally altered. But well, those are just some minor details, right? The main thing is that we enjoyed the film.
Agreed? We're not here to nitpick every single detail, but rather discuss our overall enjoyment of the movie and share some interesting tidbits with our audience. Now let's move on to another topic related to Resident Evil Afterlife, the director Paul W.S. Anderson. He has been at the helm of many installments in this franchise, including this one. What are your thoughts on his work as a director?
I've always admired his ability to bring such an intricate and complex video game series to life on the big screen. His direction is often quite visceral, and he knows how to capture the essence of the source material while adding his own unique flair. However, I do wish that he would take more risks with his storytelling or character development rather than relying so heavily on familiar tropes from previous installments.
That's a fair assessment, Tim. Personally, I appreciate his commitment to staying true to the source material, while still injecting his own creative vision into each film. But at times it feels like he is content with rehashing old storylines and characters instead of pushing the franchise forward in new directions. Overall, though, I think Paul W.S. Anderson has done a solid job as director for Resident Evil, Afterlife, and the series as a whole.
Well, said Tom, it's clear that we both have our own opinions about the film, but that's what makes these discussions so interesting. Now, let's end this segment with one last question from you. Do you think there will be another installment in the Resident Evil franchise?
With such a dedicated fan base and the financial success of past movies, it wouldn't surprise me if we see another Resident Evil film in the future. However, as far as I know, there are no official announcements yet. What do you think, Tim? Do you want to see more of Alice and her adventures in this post-apocalyptic world?
Yes, I would love to see another installment. The story has so much potential for growth and exploration, but at the same time, I also understand that it might be difficult to keep the series fresh after so many films have been released already. It will depend on how well they can come up with a new and exciting plot or concept to keep audiences engaged.
Agreed. We'll just have to wait and see what happens next. But until then, let's continue our discussion about other movies in future episodes of Tim and Tom's Film Nights.
Sounds like a plan, Tom. Let's wrap it up here.
Thanks for joining me today, everyone, and remember to stay spooky.
Well, said Tim. Now let's talk a bit about some of the actors and their performances in Resident Evil Afterlife. I have to say Milla Jovovich once again delivered an impressive performance as Alice. Her portrayal of this tough-as-nails zombie-slaying queen has become iconic at this point, and it's always a treat to see her take on such an action-packed role.
Truly, Tom, Milla Jovovich was born for these types of roles.
Her physicality and charisma really bring Alice to life on the big screen. And speaking of which, let's talk about some of the other actors in the film. Ali Larter returns as Claire Redfield, who has also become quite the skilled fighter over time. What did you think of her character development throughout the series?
I have to admit that I wasn't the biggest fan of Claire in earlier installments, but I thought she really grew on me in Resident Evil Afterlife. Her relationship with Alice has always been an interesting dynamic, and I liked how their bond evolved over time into more of a sisterly connection, rather than just being two survivors trying to look out for each other. As far as Ali Larter's performance goes, she did a great job portraying Claire's tough exterior while also showing vulnerability when needed.
That's an interesting point. It's amazing how much depth these characters have gained over the course of the series. And speaking of which, let's talk about some of the other actors who play key roles in Resident Evil Afterlife. We can't forget about Luther West and his team of survivors, or even Kay Mott, who provided some much-needed comic relief throughout the film.
Oh, truly, Tim. I thought that all the actors in this film did an amazing job bringing their characters to life. Even though there were quite a few of them, each one had their own unique personality and backstory that helped contribute to the overall narrative. It's always great when a film can create such a diverse cast without sacrificing character development or depth.
And let's not forget about Boris Kodjoe as Luther West and Wentworth Miller as Chris. Redfield both brought an air of authority and experience to their roles. Their characters served as important leaders within the group, providing guidance and support when needed. It was interesting to see how these two actors interacted with one another on screen, especially given their backgrounds in other popular franchises like Underworld and The Matrix Resurrections, respectively.
Truly, Tim. I have to admit that I wasn't familiar with Boris Kodjoe or Wentworth Miller before this film, but they both did an excellent job bringing their characters to life. Their chemistry on screen was palpable, which made it easier for the audience to connect with them and care about what happened to them throughout the story.
Well, said Tom, as always, your insights into these films are truly appreciated. I think we've covered quite a bit in this discussion about Resident Evil. Afterlife, from its script and direction to its cast of actors and their performances. What do you think our viewers will take away from our thoughts on this particular installment?
I hope that our viewers can appreciate the complexities involved in creating a successful franchise like Resident Evil. While there are certainly some aspects that could be improved upon, such as the storyline or character development, it's clear that the creative team behind these films has put in a tremendous amount of effort to bring these beloved characters and their stories to life on the big screen. And who knows? Perhaps there will be another installment in the future that addresses some of our concerns while still managing to entertain audiences worldwide.
I think that's a valid point, Tom. It seems like there are always going to be mixed opinions about different aspects of these types of films, but ultimately it comes down to personal preferences and what each viewer is looking for in their entertainment experience. As we move forward with our discussion about Resident Evil, Afterlife, and its impact on the film industry as a whole, let's not forget to consider how this particular installment has influenced other movies or TV series that have come after it.
That's an interesting topic to explore, Tim. As we all know, Resident Evil Afterlife was not just another horror film. It had a significant impact on the genre as a whole and paved the way for many more action horror hybrids that followed in its footsteps. Some notable examples include movies like 8 Weeks Later, World War Z, and even TV series like The Walking Dead. These works all share certain elements that can be traced back to Resident Evil. Afterlife, such as fast-paced action sequences, epic battles against zombie-like creatures, and a focus on strong female protagonists.
That's indeed right, Tom. I think it's fair to say that the success of Resident Evil Afterlife has helped to redefine what we expect from horror movies today. It showed us that there is an audience for these types of high-energy, action-packed films that still manage to maintain a level of suspense and terror throughout their running time. And who knows? Perhaps if it weren't for Resident Evil Afterlife, we might not have seen some of our favorite modern horror franchises come into existence.
That's a chilling thought, Tim. But I think what really sets Resident Evil Afterlife apart from other films in its genre is the way it seamlessly blends together different elements such as science fiction, thriller, and even comedy. This unique mix has helped it to stand out among the rest and create a loyal fan base that continues to support the franchise even after all these years.
Indeed, Tom, it's this willingness to take risks and push boundaries that has made Resident Evil Afterlife such an iconic film in its genre. Mm-hmm. And while we may not always agree on every aspect of it, there's no denying the impact that it has had on both the horror industry as a whole and popular culture in general. So let's raise a glass to this amazing franchise. Here's hoping for many more years of thrills and chills.
Precisely, Tim. And speaking of other films that have been influenced by Resident Evil Afterlife, one cannot help but mention the 2016 movie Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Based on the novel of the same name by Seth Grahame-Smith, This film takes the classic Jane Austen story and adds a unique twist by introducing zombies into the mix. The result is an action-packed romantic comedy that pays homage to its literary roots while also delivering thrills and laughs in equal measure.
I must admit, Thomas, that I didn't know about this particular adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. It sounds quite interesting, though, blending classic literature with the zombie. Genre is a risky move, but it seems like they pulled it off quite well. What do you think are some other aspects of Resident Evil Afterlife that made it such an influential film?
Well, Timothy, I believe there are several factors at play here. First and foremost is the visual style of the movie with its stylized action sequences and impressive special effects. Resident Evil Afterlife set a new bar for what audiences could expect from horror films. This has had a ripple effect on other movies in the genre, pushing them to step up their game when it comes to production value and overall presentation. Another key aspect is the strong female protagonist played by Milla Jovovich. Alice's tough-as-nails persona has become iconic in its own right, inspiring countless other kick-ass heroines across various forms of media. This shift towards more empowered female characters can be attributed, at least in part, to Resident Evil Afterlife and its success in telling a compelling story through the lens of a strong, capable woman.
Indeed, Tom, the influence of Resident Evil Afterlife can also be seen in TV shows like The Walking Dead, which you mentioned earlier. This show has become one of the most popular and successful television series of all time, partially due to its similarities with the Resident Evil franchise. Both feature a post-apocalyptic world overrun by zombies or other monstrous creatures. Strong emphasis on character development and survival tactics.
That's true, Tim. The success of The Walking Dead can be attributed to many factors, but it's hard not to see the influence of Resident Evil Afterlife in its DNA. Both properties share a similar blend of horror, action, and drama that has captivated audiences worldwide. It's interesting to note that while The Walking Dead started as a comic book series before being adapted for television, it was the success of Resident Evil Afterlife that helped pave the way for its eventual adaptation into one of the most successful TV shows ever made.
And I think we can also see the influence of Resident Evil Afterlife in video games as well, particularly with regards to survival, horror, and action-adventure titles. Many games have adopted elements such as fast-paced combat, resource management, and even puzzle solving that were present in Resident Evil Afterlife.
This has led to an increase in popularity for the genre as a whole and has given rise to
numerous new franchises that build upon these concepts introduced by Resident Evil Afterlife.
Indeed, Tim. The legacy of Resident Evil Afterlife extends far beyond its initial release date. It continues to inspire filmmakers, writers, and game developers alike with its unique blend of horror, action, and character development. As we continue to explore this fascinating world created by Paul W.S. Anderson and his team, let's not forget the impact that Resident Evil Afterlife has had on popular culture as a whole, an influence that will undoubtedly be felt for years to come.
Yes, indeed, Thomas. It's truly fascinating to see how one film can have such an extensive impact on various aspects of popular culture. And we mustn't forget that Resident Evil Afterlife was only the fourth installment in the Resident Evil franchise. Imagine what kind of influence the entire series has had.
That's a great point, Timothy, and it makes me curious about where this franchise is headed next. We've seen a lot of changes over the course of the films, so far from its humble beginnings as a survival horror movie to the action-packed spectacles we see today. I wonder if there will be another sequel or even a reboot at some point in the future.
Well, Tom, only time will tell what happens next with Resident Evil, but one thing is certain: this franchise has captured the imagination of audiences around the world and continues to evolve with each new installment. As for our thoughts on Resident Evil, Afterlife specifically, I believe we both agree that it's a solid entry in M, the series with its unique blend of action and horror elements, strong characters, and impressive visuals.
Precisely, Timothy, and while there may be some room for improvement as far as the story goes, overall, Resident Evil Afterlife is an enjoyable watch that delivers on all fronts. I think our viewers can take away from this discussion that it's worth giving this film a chance if they're fans of the genre or simply looking for a fun action-packed adventure to enjoy with friends or family.
And let's not forget about some of the other topics we covered during our conversation tonight, such as the importance of character development and how Resident Evil Afterlife has influenced other films, TV shows, and even video games. It just goes to show you how far-reaching this franchise truly is and how much it continues to impact popular culture today.
Truly, Tim, we've covered a lot of ground tonight in our discussion about Resident Evil Afterlife, but I hope that our viewers found it informative and entertaining. As always, we appreciate your comments, feedback, and suggestions for future episodes. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on another exciting episode of Tim and Tom's Film Nights. We hope that you've enjoyed our discussion about Resident Evil Afterlife as much as we have. As always, please remember to stay safe out there and keep watching those movies. Good night, everyone.